This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Who wants to speak first?
I'll jump in. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Wanty. I'm with EDM Studio. I'm a architect and associate principal with the firm. Danielle, Doug, you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure, Danielle, you can go first.
Okay. I'm Danielle Mercier, marketing director at EDM Studio.
And I'm Doug Gallo. I'm principal architect at Lifespan Design Studio, and we are senior center design specialists.
So for EDM Studio, we're a 15-person architecture firm out of the Hartford, Connecticut area. We've been partnering with Doug now for 12, 13 years. We've been doing it for a while with Doug, and our first senior center that we worked on together was the Chicopee Senior Center at River Mills. And since then, we've worked on, I think we're up to a dozen now, studies and actual built projects. The other projects that you guys might know of, Hadley Senior Center we built a couple of years ago, designed and built. South Hadley Senior Center we designed and built a couple of years ago. Some that are ongoing right now. We're working with Becky Moriarty down in Hamden, Massachusetts, working on an expansion renovation project with those folks. Did a feasibility study first with her, and are hoping, I think next Tuesday, a week from today, we're doing a presentation at town meeting, hopefully getting approval to move forward with that project. So that's exciting. Working with the folks up in South Deerfield on a feasibility study. They're looking for a new home for a senior center as well. We are working in Hingham right now, another feasibility study with those folks, trying to hone in on location. So both of those studies for Deerfield and for Hingham, we're wrapping up by the end of this year. And again, those are, going to town meeting vote for next spring and hopefully moving into design and construction thereafter. So those are just a summary of some of the projects that we've worked on in the past. We've designed them, we've built them, we've done many studies. That's just this team together. Doug, why don't you talk about your experience specifically?
Lifespan Design Studio, up until Memorial Day, was myself and Ellen, my wife. Ellen is a gerontologist. I'm an architect. Ellen retired this year after 18 years with Lifespan Design Studio, but have been involved in the senior center world since she was the director of a senior center starting in 1978. I designed my first senior center in 1985. And in 2006, Ellen and I decided that we were going to create this company and just work on senior center projects all across the country. Since 2006, we've worked in 32 different states. We've worked on over 130 senior center projects, and we've teamed now with 49 different architectural firms. And as Chris said, we've worked a dozen projects with EDM. We've got projects all over the country. Closest to you, we did the East Boston Senior Center in Boston with Age Strong, the city of Boston. We did the Center at Belvedere, which is it was nationally recognized by the American Institute of Architects for a Merit Award for Design for Aging in 2021. You can certainly see that on the website. You can go to our website and see numerous senior centers. We've built probably 60 senior centers in those 130 projects that have been design and studies, as Chris talked about. The senior center in Westlake, Ohio is also featured on our website. It's a very, we're very proud of that project. It was a wonderful project working with the city of Westlake. But as I said, we've worked in 32 states across the country. And there are probably 60 senior centers across the country that have been designed and built with our expertise as design specialists working with local design teams.
And you might be wondering why two architects working on, you know, these projects, you know, going back 12 years ago, when we had the opportunity to go after a senior center in Chicopee. We're architects that don't have an ego. We, you know what we don't know. And, you know, we felt like we didn't have the expertise to give to the senior center, you know, in Chicopee. So we teamed up with Doug, knowing that they had that national expertise and, you know, are leading in the trends of how senior centers are being designed and built across the country. We felt like that would be, you know, a strong team, his national expertise, our local presence, knowing how to design buildings in Massachusetts. And it's, you know, we thought it was going to be a great team way back when, and we've proven it over a dozen times now. So, you know, we think it's a strong team. We like to partner with each other. We like working with each other in general. So it's a interesting dynamic, but it's worked so far and it only continues to work. So I feel like we've talked plenty at this point. I feel like, you know, when I was talking to Cindy, we wanted to get in front of you folks to figure out where you guys are in the process and help you guys understand, you know, the path that you're going to be going down and maybe be able to help demystify the process a little bit, you know, for you all. So I'll throw it back to you guys.
I think we should just ask questions. I already got 7 on my list here, so
Perfect. This is
I
perfect.
won't take up the whole thing, but
Go for it, Dan. You start, Dan. We'll feed off you.
a lot of my stuff is practical. Programming usually drives facility, in my view. Besides the general practical, you need a lot of acreage for parking. We found that out. Have you always had, is that your first conversation with the building committee? What's your programming? What do you really need first?
Yeah, Chris, is it okay if I jump in on that? On the projects that we've worked on, Lifespan Design Studio takes the lead in with regard to programming. And the thing that we always want to know is what do you do and what do you want to do? We try not to start the project with tell us the rooms you need, because you know some of the rooms you need and you don't know some of the rooms you need. And we don't want you to get ahead of yourself thinking, well, we need a room that's this many square feet and a room that's this many square feet, because it has to be based on what are the activities you're trying to provide, what are the services you're trying to provide, what are the programs you're trying to provide, what are you doing today that you want to continue doing, what aren't you doing today because the building doesn't allow you to, or you're seeing a change in demand or requests within the community, and what are some of those things that you might want to do in the future that you're not currently doing. So the short answer is yes, you start talking about what is it you're trying to accomplish. And what we do then is we take that information and translate it into a list of rooms and spaces based on that knowledge. And there's a lot of back and forth. Cindy can tell you, having gone through it once before, it's a real dialogue. You know, we know what we know, but you know what you know. And I think it's critically important, you know, that the National Institute of Senior Centers loves to say, if you have visited one senior center, you have visited one senior center. And we have found that across the country. Every community is different. Your needs are all different, but that's where you start. And I think in commenting about parking, that is a critical issue. And we often have found clients that get ahead of themselves, go out and buy a piece of property, or they designate a piece of property that the city owns or something like that, and says, well, that's the piece of property we're gonna put the senior center on, with no basis of why they chose that piece of property other than they thought it was big enough. But we have found time and time again that the biggest challenge with most pieces of property is not getting enough parking. And when we calculate parking, we go way beyond zoning. Zoning probably in your town might say 2.5 to 3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet for a building where a senior center might fall on their zoning chart. We say you need 6 to 7 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet, because the vast majority of adults coming to senior centers are driving themselves. They're usually coming in the car by themselves, maybe one or two at a time. You're not doing a lot of carpooling. You're not doing a lot of efficiency with regard to how people are coming because you all have different schedules. And so those are the two biggest issues that we think are critically important to get the design professionals involved right out of the gate. Talk about programming and talk about how big a piece of land you need once we know how big the building's going to be based on the programming.
I have other questions, but do we have follow-ups? Tom?
Yeah, just a follow-up on that, Doug. One of the ways we started to look at it when we visited all the senior centers in the area was what was the size of the land they built on, or what was a preferential size of that property to be. And in most cases, we heard 5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Is looking at it from an acreage standpoint okay?
I think it is, but I think it's also critically important to look at the proportionality of that 5 acres. I often say, and I don't try to, be sounding smart about something, but a room that's 1 foot wide by 100 feet long is 100 square feet, but it's a useless room. And Chris and I can talk about numerous projects where, the client said, "Oh, we've got 4.5 acres." But it's 4.5 acres. It's long and skinny, and there's not even room to put a properly proportioned building on the site. So 5 acres is a good number. I mean, that's, it's not going to be everybody's answer, but that's, you're not saying 2 acres. When we've seen projects that they say, "Oh, we have 2 acres," and it's like, well, now we got a problem starting out of the gate. But the proportionality of the site is really important. Also understanding the limitations of the site. What are the easements on the site? What utilities are on the site? Are there any wetlands on the site? So all of those things, what's the usable area versus what's the actual overall size of the property? We're working in Hingham, as Chris mentioned, and some of the limitations that we looked at a number of sites were the fact that there were wetlands on the site. And one of the sites had wetlands kind of running right through the middle of it. So it was, now what do we do? And what we did was we told them that's not a buildable site.
Anybody on this subject? Okay, I have a couple more practical. It relates to the acreage issue. There was this debate. I think we're at the point of having a single floor, but what is the cost architecturally of going up instead of having 1 floor, and elevator cost? I'm just curious because I think we're going to try and recommend to we're not the building committee, by the way. We're an ad hoc committee making a report and recommendations to a yet to be formed building committee. So we might say we really recommend 1 floor, but I'd like to hear how those costs enter into it. Because, everybody's going to ask, what's it cost?
Yeah, I mean, the 1 story versus 2 story, in my mind, in our experience, it's very similar depending on what you're talking about, and it can obviously vary from design to design. But from a simple standpoint, if you're talking a single story, you're not dealing with additional square footage for, 2 egress stairs and an elevator, right? But when you go to 2 stories, you're reducing the amount of site work that you're, putting on that site, the foundation work, the underground utility work. So, when everything kind of washes out in the end, they're pretty similar to one another. I wouldn't say that from a cost standpoint, that should be a deciding factor whether you go 1 story or 2 stories. I think there's other factors to determine whether 1 story or 2 stories is preferable as opposed to the cost factor, if that makes sense.
So Chris, where I was going with that next is, from your experience, is there a difference from a programmatic standpoint, a pro and con about 2 floors versus 1 floor?
I think when you look at that, there are a number of factors. From a design standpoint, if you've got large activity spaces, such as a large multi-purpose room, you don't want an 8 or a 9 foot ceiling in a large multi-purpose room. You want probably a 10 or a 12 foot ceiling so that the room has, again, volume-wise, has a proportionality that's comfortable. So that means either your floor to floor has to be higher than normal, or that part of the building doesn't have anything above it. So in many cases, that's what happens. If you've got a gymnasium, certainly that's what happens. So you don't end up with the same square footage on the first floor as you do on the second floor. From an operational standpoint, we often find that if it's a multi-story building, you want to have staff up on the second floor. You know, should somebody be upstairs that has a presence within the building? One of the other things that we've seen, and we've toured a number of senior centers, this team has toured a number of senior centers with clients that have said, this is what I don't want. And it's a multi-story building, but when you enter the building, you have no sense that there's another floor. You know, it's like walking into an office building. You have a first floor and you have stairs and elevators, but you don't know what's upstairs. So what we've tried to do on those occasions is to create like a 2-story lobby space so you can see that there's a second floor and you have some connectivity to that. We did that at Chicopee. Actually, Chicopee was built on the side of a hill, so we had entrance high and entrance low. And you walked in and there was an open 2-story area, and the second floor was very apparent. So so there are a number of factors, but again, when you do that, paying for that ambiance and that operational approach does have some additional cost because you're not using up all of the footprint as floor area. But we've done multi-story buildings. We've done them very successfully. But I think that simplistically, if your building isn't too large, doing it on one floor makes a lot of sense. We did 2 senior centers for the city of Oklahoma City, and they're both over 40,000 square feet. And the way we try to design a building when it's rectangular in shape is to enter it on the long side, somewhere about the middle, so that when you walk into the building, you don't have these long expanses of hallways. From a psychological standpoint, you know, you're not ending down on the short end and just have this massive building in front of you. But you certainly can do a building at that square footage. Not that I'm thinking yours is going to be that large, but you know, that kind of square footage, and still make it very usable, very walkable, and have the cognitive mapping very simple inside.
Yeah, Doug mentioned the staffing issue, and you know, I forgot to mention we're working up in Amherst right now. They were studying how to renovate there. It's a community center that has a senior center as a component of it, but one of the struggles that we have there is the senior center doesn't really have an identity in and of itself within the facility. There's a bunch of different organizations in the senior center, and people have a hard time navigating the facility. So one of the things we proposed to the senior center director was, well, what if we take all your disparate pieces and we put you on 2 floors, but you're connected visually and you have your own space, so people won't be wandering through the senior center that are looking to other organizations, which was one of the problems there. And she had a visceral reaction against it, mainly because of the staffing. She didn't have enough staff, and she felt like she would need to separate her staff to put somebody upstairs and downstairs to be able to keep an eye on what's going on upstairs. But staff works so closely together, as you know, Cindy probably knows, that once you have a small group and you separate one person from that group, well, who do you separate to put upstairs? And then all of a sudden they're on an island upstairs by themselves all day. It complicates the staffing component and how do you work the facility. So it can be done. It's just those are the different challenges.
Anybody else on this? Cindy?
I know this is being recorded, so just with apologies to any other senior centers and how we might be representing our experience of visiting them. One of the things we noticed in Hadley, which is a beautiful center, you get such a lovely feeling going into it. The director said to me recently, and she wasn't involved in the building of it, she's a newer director, and she said, "Oh, sometimes we're so full. I wish we could turn the lobby into program space." Because maybe, it's a small town and maybe there's one person reading a book and they're bursting at the seams everywhere else in the building. And what I was going to ask you is, are there traditions around senior centers similar to libraries where you have this kind of communal space and maybe it's quieter space like a lobby and soft seating that is maybe not what a modern senior center needs, but maybe you do need it? Like how how flexible can you be with some of these traditions, but still have it be a senior center? And have you done any experimenting around that? That's one part of my question. And the other, in terms of traditions, is have you gone into any communities where people are saying small, so not Boston where you're going to have multiple senior centers, or Springfield even, where people are saying, sure, I'll come to the senior center for something sometimes, but I want senior services to be a little more decentralized in my community. Why don't you fix up a community room in the housing building? Should all the resources be in one central place? It's hard to know how people will use us in 10 years after we build. So those
I think to your first question, senior centers have changed dramatically over the last 40 years. And the reality is the concept of lounge space and impromptu socialization space is relatively new in senior centers. If you think about the old senior centers, and this was one of the issues and one of the problems, and it's also how senior centers used to be used, how they are used today. Traditionally, maybe 30 years ago, it was very common for people to come to the senior center, be there when the door opens, get kicked out when the door closed, and they were there all day long. If there was a meal program, they were having lunch there, and it was very much an all-day event. What has changed demographically, and I think the baby boomers and the Gen Xers have kind of been leading this, is much more of an a la carte approach to what's going on in the senior center and when I'm going to the senior center. And so the difference is that when you were there for the entire day, or there from a specific time to a specific time, it was like going to school. You went from one room and activity to another room and an activity, another room and an activity. And what people have now discovered is they want it to be more, whatever term you want to use, more like a country club, or, go and be. But if if you're there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but there's an activity at 4 o'clock and you just want to hang out, you need a place to hang out. And so you need a place for socialization and a place for just to sit down and read a book, possibly. So, and certainly going through COVID, we found out that isolation is, absolutely, truly, measurably bad for your mental health, is bad for your physical health. They say that extreme isolation is the equivalent of smoking 15 packs of cigarettes a day to your physical health. So you need places in senior centers where people can just come and be and hang out. What we have found is, as we've kind of expanded upon that, is it shouldn't just be one location. Because, if you're a senior center that believes that there should be a TV in the lobby, then you're going to have people sitting around watching TV. What about people that want to play cards? What about people that want to sit around and read a book, or they want to do texting with their grandkids or whatever? So having multiple locations throughout the building, if you've got an exercise studio and an equipped fitness room and other places within the building as well, you've got people coming and going. So you've got people queuing up for the next class. So you have to have places where people can queue up and not just be hanging out in the hall, leaning a shoulder against the wall. So I understand what Hadley's saying. Hadley was one of those projects that there wasn't enough room for parking, and it was a long, skinny site. So the building became this long, skinny site. And what we did, we thought successfully, to help alleviate that challenge, was to have a large activity or a large lobby space. So when you arrived, you had a sense of arrival. But then we also put a lounge space at the other end of the hall, so that your travel distance between those lounge spaces seemed short. Even though the building is long, that was one of the big challenges with that site. And so the other thing that's happened over the years with senior centers is, for years people were saying multi-purpose, multi-purpose, multi-purpose. I want to be able to have an art class in this room, and have an exercise class in this room, and have a class, learn how to speak French in this room. Well, the baby boomers and the Gen Xers have changed that too. They're looking for a more professional experience. They're willing, if they've got the money, they're willing to join a club, a gym club, because they want that professional experience. They don't want to be sitting over in the corner of the multi-purpose room riding a bike while a quilting group is going on. They're looking for an experience of a more professional experience. So you do have more rooms that are dedicated, but your challenge and your goal is that those rooms are full all of the time. It makes no sense for you to have an exercise studio and have Monday at 9 o'clock is the only time you're ever using it. You want to use it every hour of every single day and have all those activities going on. So that's a long answer to your first question, and I forgot what your second question was.
Yeah. Well, my second question was, have you run into communities where one of the obstacles as the generations change is that the body public doesn't necessarily want to put all of their senior service resource into a center? They want to decentralize it more to where people are living, or maybe integrate it into, just elsewhere in the community. So you have to think about that when you're building, because maybe we're not building for all 6,000 people, 55 plus, maybe, it's just something we're grappling with, because we're trying to picture the people who today are in their 50s and their 40s maybe. Will they want a senior center in 20 years as opposed to something else?
It's a very real question. What we have found mostly is that people are looking for a one-stop shop. Why would you want to have to get in your car to go over here to do a certain activity and then come back over to this center and so on? But it doesn't mean you can't decentralize the services you're offering. We have seen communities that have done multiple facilities where they've done, a flagship, but then they've also done a smaller center on the other side of town. I think that's a decision that you need to think about, and there is no right or wrong answer. It's just a matter of, are you going to get the best bang for your buck if you do decentralize? We've almost every single project, when we look at various sites, and we're doing this up in Deerfield in South County, where should the senior center be located? And how to, like you said, maybe there's demographic shifting that's going to occur just based on where people are living now and so on. And we've so often heard, well, that's too far out of town. That's too far out of town. That's too far away. And you then have to ask certain questions, like, how long has your Home Depot been in town? And they built that 3 years ago. Did that used to be really far out of town? Yes. Do you go there now? All the time. So if it's 2 more minutes to drive in your car, is that really a big deal? And the answer eventually is, yeah, that 2 minutes turns into 5, turns into 10, turns into 15. Yes. Do you decentralize because you can't find something that's right smack in the middle for everybody? Every community is different in that regard. And I don't think there is no correct answer in answering that.
Well, Deerfield specifically, we're actually trying to solve that as an issue, that they currently have programs scattered around, these 3 different towns that are feeding into this senior center. And they're part of the study that we're doing with them is we're trying to centralize it, because it has been confusing for people. One of the things that we heard in one of our public engagement events was, people go to the wrong location all the time because they're confused as to where this program is, or where this program is, or where this program is, because it is in so many different places. I think they have 4 different locations because their facilities have been, broken up over time, and they've lost space. And, the senior center ends up, as you know, Cindy, in the craziest places sometimes. So that's one thing we're trying to solve, is it is decentralized right now, and they say they want it to be more centralized. To Doug's point, is that the right answer for every community? No, but it's definitely depends on how that community wants their senior center to function.
Okay, just on 2 floors, that's where we started with this, but other than that, Anything else?
I have a question that I think is a little bit related. How do you all think about, and then how do you advise we think about, I planning for the programming we have and would like to have, but also, and I do think having spaces that really work for those programs, but also accounting for a future we don't totally know, and having capacity for that so that we're not building something that, you know, in 5 years, we're gonna be like, oh, that room doesn't, you know, you can't totally control for that, but how do you all think about that in your process?
There are a number of ways to do it. And I will say that there is no guarantee that your membership is going to explode, that you're going to have 2 or 3 times as many people coming to the senior center as they come now. But statistically, most communities are tapping into about 5 to 10% of their older population coming to the senior center on a regular basis. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth. Again, with that said, so many of the senior centers we've designed, their membership has exploded. The one that I mentioned up in Westlake, their membership has tripled in the last 4 years. One of the senior centers we did in Oklahoma City, it was a brand new senior center. The city didn't own any senior centers whatsoever. And this was the very first one. They also had a business partner. They had an operating partner who was going to operate the center. The city was not going to operate it. And they had to show a business plan. And they were hoping that they would have 500 members in the first 6 months and 1,000 members in the first year. After a year, they had 2,500 members, and it's continued to grow ever since. So how do you plan that? There are a couple of ways to plan that. And number one is to evaluate your hours of operation. And if you're open from 9 to 3, and you can be open from 7:30 to 6, you're using all of that square footage many more times, having the availability of that, than instead of making your center bigger. So I think that you need to look at your programming and really evaluate what's happening over the 5, 6, or 7 days a week that you're doing in the center to maximize the usage of your square footage. Sizing spaces is based on how many people you want in that activity. And again, some of that is the quality of the experience. You know, if you're leading an exercise class, when we talk to exercise instructors, they don't want a class of bigger than maybe 18 to 20 people, because, you know, if they're doing yoga or Tai Chi or Zumba, they want to be able to look in everybody's eyes, make sure they're clear-eyed, make sure nobody's turning green, nobody's, you know, getting ready to pass out. You need to be able to look at people and know what's going on. And it's also the quality of the experience. You know, don't you want to have more of a semi-private experience with an instructor than a gang experience of 50 or 60 people? Same with an arts room, you know, so you're sizing the rooms for how big you want those rooms to be for the group sizes you want. And then once you start to say, we always like to make sure that you've got a small gathering space, a medium-sized gathering space, and a large gathering space, because you don't want to have grief counseling over in the corner of a 3,000 square foot multi-purpose room at one little table. You'd be leaving more depressed than when you arrived. So if you can size spaces that way, create storage for tables and chairs and equipment, then you can maximize the multi-purpose opportunities within those spaces and have different size spaces and make sure you've got enough of them. Should you be thinking about expanding the building for the future? Yes. If if in the design process, you can see that may be a possibility, but your budget's only going to allow you to do something now. But keep in mind that when you do that, the design should take into account the opportunity for expansion. So maybe there's a master plan done with a phase 1 and a phase 2, but also remember, when you make the building larger, you need more parking. And that's one of the things, again, that we see people forget is, and we've done this where we've designed a building and designed a future expandable area that's very easy to expand into, but we've also identified on the site, and here's the additional 30 parking spaces we need when that happens. Otherwise, you're going to create more of a problem than less of a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
want to make sure I ask this question because I know we only have 15 more minutes. No time in the world. What time do you guys have to leave? Because we want to make sure we get a,
I don't have to go anywhere, but we,
all right.
I have until about 1, so we got some more
Try to
time.
get done by 1. The question I had, I have to marvel, you guys designed South Hadley. That's my principal design idea for Easthampton. Because we have similar community sizes, similar size of population of seniors. And I liked how it was laid out. But one of the things that we always hear is, what's it gonna cost? Since you did South Hadley, I forget what it cost. I know we have it somewhere in our reports. What do you think if we decided to build a duplicate structure similar to that today? We're looking at probably, in my mind, 15, 17 million dollars. And that's exclusive of buying the land. So I'm just curious because the first thing out of people's mouths when we go to the building committee is going to be, what's that going to cost? And then we have to market it, that's Danielle's part, to the community. So we have to make sure we say, well, yeah, but we really want this multi-purpose room, or we, and the second part of that question is, what kind of cuts do you normally get when the building committee says, well, we have to cut something? And so first, what do you think it's going to cost us if we did something like that today?
So South Hadley was a little under 20,000 square feet. So I'm gonna call it 20,000 square feet for ease of math here. We're looking at about $800 a square foot today. You know, escalated maybe towards next year, and escalations, you know, inflation's kind of settled in a little bit, so things are stabilizing. That puts you at about 16 million. You know, so what you were saying and where you think, you know, what you think the range is, you're right on cue with that. So 15 to 20 million, you know.
What do you find, just a second, what would you find when you go to building committees and they say, well, it's too much, we don't want to market that? What do you find people cut first? I'm just curious about that. Like, well, let's just drop the square footage, every room gets smaller.
Well, so let's pull from some examples that we just went through. So Hadley, we had a 12,500 square foot building designed. It was all ready to go. We did most of the construction documents, have been approved many different times. We ran into some permitting issues that I won't get into. We had to cut 2,000 square feet out of the building. So that facility, we cut a small multi-purpose room, and we had to essentially squeeze all of the other spaces. We couldn't lose any other, you know, particular activity spaces. So we squeezed down every activity space to, you know, basically bare minimum, which affected how many people could use the spaces. But that was part of the compromise of, you know, it's either this or the town doesn't approve it. So it was kind of a combination of losing one of their flexible spaces and compromising on how many people are in each activity space. And we took, you know, a little bit from here, a little bit from here, a little bit from here. Hamden Senior Center, we're working on right now. That one, like I said, we're going to go for a town meeting vote next Tuesday. We already went through this in the spring. We proposed that facility going from about 7,000 square feet, which was built in 2004. So it's about 20 years old. It's a little over 7,000 square feet. We propose an addition based on all the programs that they want to do of about 5,000 square feet. And the town said, nope, too much money. We went to town meeting, and that was what we heard. We didn't hear any, well, we don't need that space, or we don't need that space. All we heard was it's too much money, right? But we went back to the building committee, went round and around. We decided to shrink the office space a little bit. We had moved the vestibule and created a larger lounge space, which, you know, to Cindy's point from earlier, they didn't have. We were going to put that as part of the renovation. We got rid of that space. We shrunk it. We didn't get rid of it. We shrunk it down a little bit, moved the offices in a little bit, shrunk those spaces. We had a conference room and a large multi-purpose room or large meeting room. We combined those into a compromised one single room that had a folding partition that could still be used as two different spaces. So we gained a bunch of square footage from that. So we, grabbed about 1,000 square feet from that. Now, granted, these are smaller moves that we're trying to make. If you have a building committee that says we got a $15 million project and the town says, nope, you're only going to get 8 million. That's a little bit of a tougher conversation to have. But usually the spaces are the flexible spaces that are planning for the future, to the conversation we were having earlier, because inevitably we have these conversations about this building's supposed to be designed, not just for today, but for 25 years from now. So, but when rubber meets the road and we're talking budget and dollars and cents, those flex spaces, those future spaces are the first ones to go. So those are just some examples that we have recently.
Tom first and Cindy. Go ahead, Tom.
So just some observations more than questions. First of all, we've only got one chance to get this right. And I hope that the building committee, us a little bit, but more so the building committee, looks at costs as one of the last things. The first thing should be, what do we need? What is it we need? And in a brainstorming session, money should be no object. Programming what is it you want in a perfect senior center?
Right.
And then it comes down to what that might cost. We never thought we'd sell $100 million school to the city of Easthampton, but we did, because we showed the need and we showed what it would look like. When it comes to location, or I believe if we build it, they will come. We could build it on top of Mount Tom and it'll be full all the time if it's the right senior center. It won't matter where we build it. When we had a session at the senior center, there were 40 people there. And we asked the question, how many people drove here versus how many people walked? And 3 hands went up of people that walked. So one of the big points early on was walkability. It doesn't have to be walkable. They've got to have parking like we don't have today. So I'm hoping the brainstorming that the building committee is going to do down the road has very little to do with money out of the gate. And let's see what it costs. And if it's a difference between a couple $1 million, my God, over 20 years of paying that back, it's a rounding error. With all due respect, it's a rounding error.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because we always get asked, but I agree with Tom. We need to decide what we want, and money's no object for us. We're going to put that in there. Our system, in our mind, is an override vote. It's not town meeting, we're going to give you existing funds or maybe bonded through existing payments. So that's a different process. So if the bids come in and we've had an override vote for 15 million and the bids come in at 16 million, that's when the cuts will occur. But I think Tom is correct. Cindy had a question.
Yeah. Maybe this is more for Doug. So some centers get built with a skeleton staff because the staff never had a space to work in, and the city at some point is going to populate that center with the staff to do the work that we're talking about. It seems to me there's got to be some science, some way to figure out what is if you build a center, could you project the staffing cost from everything from custodial to kitchen for a community that doesn't, let's look at the kitchens. So South Hadley doesn't have a full kitchen. As my understanding is they have made the decision to have a catering kitchen, whereas Long Meadow has like 2 rooms that are kitchen rooms, and it's like the maximum kitchen. Ludlow, their massive kitchen and dining program is like a centerpiece of what they do. We are in a community and a time where volunteerism is dropping as much as we try to encourage it. So let's just take that off the table for the moment. So what we build is going to need staff to operate it, to realize, and even when you say maximize the use of that center, maybe you could expand your hours, you need more staffing. So I'm
Absolutely.
just wondering, have people in their planning, is there like a rubric out there to help them? Because even if it costs much less to hire staff, even over 5 years, than making these big decisions about, are you going to lose your storage space and your office space? And, how do you have this conversation with a finance committee? Because they've really got to think about the staffing longer term too.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. There are ways of calculating that. We actually work with a retired senior center director who retired as a senior center director and went to work with the National Council on Aging. And she is now since retired from them. And she now is a consultant. And we hire her to do our operational and staffing analyses with the projects we work on. And she says, if these are the things you're trying to do, again, dialogue, it's not a matter of just walking in the door and taking the drape off and saying, ta-da, here's your answer. But talk about staffing costs, talk about operational costs. That's something we can get into with the engineers with regard to, what does it cost to turn the lights on every day? All of those types of things too. So yes, there are, of the three of us sitting here, we don't have those answers, but we know people that can get those answers. Getting back to the previous question too, with regard to size and money and so on, we just went through this, or a couple of months ago, went through this in Hingham, where we sat down, did the architectural programming, and came back and said, okay, you thought you needed a 15,000 square foot building, maybe 18,000, maybe 20,000. We ended up at what, Chris, 28,000, 29,000? And they were like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And we said, so tell us what you don't need. And they stared at it and they stared at him. And we didn't hold the gun to their head in the meeting. We said, go back and study this. We came back to them and we said, okay, so how do we make this building smaller? And they said, we can't. This is the building we need. And the director there said, this is the building I want to be able to operate this senior center. I can operate this senior center. I need more staffing, but if I don't design and build this senior center, we're falling short and the community is being affected by that. This is the size the building needs to be. And the building committee and everybody involved in the process said, yeah, you're right. We can find 500 square feet, but we're not taking 6,000 square feet off this building. And so part of that has to be your effort in marketing and letting, having everybody involved, the building committee, everybody at this table, knowing why decisions were made and how those decisions were made. They weren't made haphazardly. They were made very seriously. And the size of the building that you want is the size of the building that you need. And these are the reasons why. And that's one of the issues that we're dealing with down in Hamden, is the fact that we went through this once before and this is what they need. And people will say, oh, we don't need a new senior center. We have one. And it's like, no, you need a new senior center. Or we have a lovely senior center. Why do we need a new senior center? Because it's really not lovely. And if you look at it every day, go on vacation and come back and take a good look at it, and realize what the problems are. So
I don't want to let Danielle go without speaking, because you're a marketer, and I'm assuming once we get this plan in place, you're going to advise on how the building committee should market it. One of the things I'm going to say is, if you build it, they will come. One of the things that really drove me crazy was hearing that in South Hadley, they have this big, large, when we were there visiting, yoga event, and half of the people were from Easthampton in South Hadley. So how do you market something like this? And I know that's a big question. And how have you found it difficult? Because for us, I'm pretty sure it's going to be voters. They're going to make this decision. They already voted on a $109 million school. And I'm always saying, well, the seniors deserve now. What do you think, Danielle?
Oh,
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, I think it's really just working with the building committee and you guys to, collaborate on what's going to be most effective to get people excited and how can we generate excitement. But it's really leaning on you guys and your knowledge of the community and everything that we do during programming. And Chris and I have done programming together a couple times at various senior centers. So it's learning, what do they want and how can we best appeal to them?
Okay.
I think one of the other things that Cindy mentioned before, which is critical, you've got to ask the 40 and 50-year-olds in your community. You've got to get them excited about it. I always joke a little bit that, well, I don't joke about this. We want your senior center to be the nicest building in the community. We want everybody in the community to say, oh, I want to have my meetings there. I want our club to meet there and so on. But you want the 40 and 50-year-olds to say, I can't wait till I'm old enough to go to the senior center. and that's our goal. That's your goal.
40-year-olds out now?
Well, we kick 54-year-olds out now, so there are people clamoring to get in. And the other thing is, we don't want to lose what we do have.
Right.
So people are saying to me, wait, you want to build a new center? But what I like about you guys is you're so welcoming and all the staff are out on the floor or practically because they have no wall. And, with people, hello, Florence, Florence comes to us. I just looked at who comes to us from out of town. And there are certain people who come to us, they just prefer our center. Does that mean we should design it to be what they want that they don't like in their own town? I don't know, but it could just be the staff, the people. We don't know what is the magic. So just to say publicly, we appreciate that the public likes to come to the current center and they like the feeling that we do generate. So then the challenge would be to figure out in a modern, appropriate building and setting with all the accessibility and age and dementia friendly things that we do need, how do we foster that same community feeling that they want? Because we don't want to kill that. And to me, having been in a couple different centers for work, I know one thing people don't really want to see is the staff all hidden behind the big fort, but sometimes you just have to get the staff out of the way so you can design the program space. So there are challenges, but that's what we're grappling with too.
Yeah. That's part of the
process. That's part of process. And if you think about all the things that are wrong with your center right now, the fact that you have to go upstairs to get in the door, or if you go in the elevator, you're someplace else in another part of the world, and what type of security and safety is there? And, when you think about all of those, the bathrooms, you've heard me say it before, but simplistically, senior centers have to have 3 good things starting off in the design, and then you go from there. You have to have good parking, good bathrooms, and good storage. And if you've got those on your way, you're on your way to a good design. But that's, you're right. And there are people who think steel and glass means it's going to be it's going to feel institutional, or it's not going to be homey, or it's not going to feel warm and welcoming. You can achieve all of that if you want something traditional looking, if you want something contemporary or modern looking, all of those things can still be achieved. And so much of it, as you said, comes down to the staff and the way you operate the facility.
Chris, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going back to the marketing thing. The biggest thing for me in marketing is community involvement. What you don't want is for it to feel like, all right, we have this building committee and they're working with, the select board or whoever the, decision makers are in the town, and they figure this thing out by themselves. And, that's it. Part of what we would be doing with the building committee is having public surveys to ask these questions, having public events where people are coming to the center, we're asking them questions, we're doing focus groups with people, like we're including them as part of the process. We have, we put a website up and make sure that all the information that we are giving to the building committee, the public has easy access to, not just access to, but easy access to finding this information. So that in and of itself is, the biggest marketing strategy is how can we get this community involved beyond the building committee.
Yes, and fortunately, we've just built 2 beautiful schools. And I know that Tom Brown was chair here of this latest school. They had a lot of forums. They had a lot of discussion, and they have, I'm sure we have websites so that people could find the question, answer their question. We have 5 minutes, so just wait. Somebody else here want to speak to Sandy?
Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in the kitchen area. How is that working out with most of the facilities you've dealt with? Is it super important so that people could come in, sit down and have lunch? Does that come into play at all with the ones that you have done so far?
I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah, if you've got a congregate meal plan program, or if you've got a cafe program where you can, anybody can come in off the street and buy lunch, and if you've got a subsidized meal program associated with that, you can integrate that so that those individuals are giving a donation. It depends on what you're trying to do in that kitchen. Are you going to rent the facility out, and can a caterer come in and use that kitchen for somebody's anniversary party? Is it a full service kitchen? Do you want to prepare your own food on site? The center I mentioned in Belvedere in Virginia, they've got a full blown cafe. They don't have a lunch program, but they have a cafe. They purchased a franchise, and they have a beer and wine license, and they do 3 meals a day.
Write it down.
The center that I mentioned, the center I mentioned in Westlake, Ohio, they have a true chef who does all their meals, and they have a cafe, and they prepare the food for the cafe as well as their congregate meals program. It's the design of the kitchen and the design of your food expectations is as much of a design project as the whole project is a design project. And many times, and we have, working with EDM studios, sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't, we'll bring a food service consultant in. If the kitchen is going to be big enough that it's going to be 1,000 square feet or something, and it's going to be a full production kitchen, you need somebody that's what they do. It's like you wouldn't design your own pool. You get an aquatics expert involved in that discussion. So, the kitchen is a big deal. And obviously the success of what you're going to do with regard to food is going to be critical to how well the kitchen is designed.
Okay, so we have a couple minutes.
I know Chris needs to leave. Thank you, Chris.
I can hang out for a few more minutes.
Well, one next question Tom has been anxious to ask, and then I guess we'll call it.
Just another quick observation. I couldn't agree with Chris more on the public engagement and public involvement, and not shying away from the tough questions. I mean, on the new school, we told taxpayers your taxes are going to go up $700 a year.
Right.
But we explained the need, we explained everything. That vote passed by a 70% margin. At the end of the day, I was not a believer in the beginning. The beauty of it is the seniors are a huge voting bloc in this community. So we get the seniors engaged and we've got it done. Secondly, I'm not overly concerned, Cindy, about staffing. Again, if you build it, they will come. If we double or triple or even more our users over 5 years, to me, it's an easy sales pitch to stand before the mayor, the city council, and say, we need more staff. Look what's happened. We've gone from 1,000 to 3,000 to 5,000 users. And again, getting a room full of seniors in front of city council or the mayor is going to sway some votes our way for more staffing. I look at the planning department and what happened to them over Jeff's tenure. They went from 2 people to 5 or 6 people because they proved the value to the community. So we could do the same easily.
We should build what we want to build, because if we allow staffing to restrict it, we're not really planning for the future, right? And the fact that that place in Oklahoma City had a huge turnout in 1 year says, well, they must have hired more people. And I like to think, thank you. A lot of what you've said to us is going to really It's certainly going to influence me and what we put in our report. And I hope to be on the building committee. It influences me now. So thank you. And I'll say this off the cuff. Don't know anything, but EDM should be at the top of our list for architects, but who knows? I don't know how that works.
It's a bid process.
Cross that bridge when we get there.
It's a low bidder.
But I do appreciate that following from the feasibility study you did of the current post office building and whether or not we could improve it. I appreciate you had that depth, you know, so you, obviously we couldn't really have a great conversation if you didn't know us at all. And so thank you so much. It took a while to get this together, but I really appreciate you giving us this
Extremely
time.
helpful.
This time, you know, and knowing us and what our challenges were. It's helpful to me. I can understand what you're saying better because I know you know our current situation.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
our
you.
pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you very much.
Good seeing you. Good luck.
Nice meeting
Thank
everybody.
you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
It is, Dan, unfortunately, a public bid process.
Yeah.
Public bid.
Can we do a time check and an
Just
agenda
1
check?
o'clock. We want to go into the site selection executive meeting. We don't need to public speak 10 minutes.
Why don't you get the minutes approved?
Why don't we approve? Now, you can't vote on September. We're going to vote on September's meeting minutes if you weren't here. So just for the sake of who was here for September?
Who remembers if they were here?
1, 2, 3.
I assume I was.
If you weren't here, you just abstain.
No, the point is, I don't want to vote on it if we don't have 6 votes.
Oh, okay.
So who was here? Leslie, were you here?
Tom,
September?
you weren't here.
minutes, so
Wasn't
I was
here.
certainly here.
Yeah, Leslie was here.
1, 2, 3.
Sandy,
I don't know that you,
Oh,
I
wait,
don't know that you need 6 votes. You need a majority of the people that were there.
No.
oh, wait, I was here. Yeah.
Was I here?
I was remote.
excuse
No,
me.
I'm excused. Okay. So I'm like,
The only person who
Thought
was
you needed a majority.
there, who isn't
You
here
got
is
me
Chuck.
thinking, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure you need.
There's only one
we have
person.
6. 1, 2, 3,
All
4,
right, all in
5, 6.
favor of approving?
I
We don't,
wasn't here.
Oh, you weren't here.
well,
Just take it.
we're gonna take the meeting minutes. Someone wants to question it, then okay. All in favor of approving the September meeting minutes? All abstaining? Okay, 2 abstentions. October, all in favor of approving the October minutes? Who was here? October, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay.
Oh, no.
Crystal, you
I
weren't
can't
here.
remember which one
Hold on
I'm
a
missing,
moment.
which one I'm. I know-
October was the meeting that we had in the school department upstairs.
Yes, so I was here for that.
You were here for that.
That was
like
one of the
forum.
sessions.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was.
Oh,
yes.
it was one of the sessions.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So we have.
We were all
of us-
here.
All right, good.
Okay. Thank you to the secretary.
So I just want to take a minute to talk. It's not necessarily off the agenda about what we just heard. I think it's something that we should use in our reports. And I was going to suggest, for instance, our site committee, our not site committee, but the visiting committee, I forget what we call that. That we put together what we think should be in the building. And then programming should tell us what programming we should have. Because all of this is going to drive architecture, drive what we want. So for me, it was a very informative. Does anybody have any comment on what we just heard?
I agree. It was great. It was fantastic. A lot of things that I never thought of, they brought up.
They're professionals on it.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, Dan. I just wouldn't want anybody to be nervous that in any way sets it in stone. Because the building committee next year might say, well, we need to add this, this, and this because of additional ideas that come out. So obviously, anything we do as an ad hoc committee is not set in stone for the future building committee.
Do we list our report as recommendations, or this is what our observations are? I like the word observations because recommendations has a finality to it in a sense, like we recommend that you consider this, or we observe that. I don't know, what do you think?
It's up to us. You know, the mayor basically wants this committee to produce something actionable, like
Recommendations.
Yes. And part of it is, well, I think the budget for the next step of what the building committee would do, I think she's already planning on it, and I don't know how much it is and how much work can get done with the first part of her budget on that. So we would maybe need to also find out, if we knew, okay, for like the first year of the building committee, this is what they're gonna do. Like, let's just say it takes a long time, 2-3 years before they're gonna put anything out to the public. I'd rather have something as strong as possible with all the work we've done and what we've researched and recommendations, because by then people will all have forgotten all the work that we did and they'll be starting over. So the
Kinda
more
why I
that's
wanna
in
be on
it,
the committee. I want to be on the building committee because we did all this work.
right, so the
Tom is experienced.
Well, remember this, the school building committee was in place for 7 years before they put a shovel in the ground.
So I
So
hope it doesn't take that long.
I don't think it'll take that long either, but the point is that it does have
Yeah.
a life expectancy to it, unfortunately.
So the more meat that we can put in the report, whether we're saying these are observations or these are trends or whatever, the better.
I think recommendations. We
I like
recommend these
recommendations.
facilities. We recommend that it's 5 acres. We recommend that it's 1 floor.
It carries more weight.
The one thing I didn't ask them, going to the 2 floors, was remember when somebody discussed what happens if the elevator breaks? You shut the
Oh, yeah,
building
yeah,
down?
yeah.
Because now you're saying you're
Yeah.
disabled. We can't have you here today.
For that, it's a safety issue. Yeah.
So that's another reason not to have elevators.
Right, because you need to have a backup.
Yep,
Yeah.
you do.
You have to have a backup.
You'd have to have 2 elevators, one that's not working.
Or a freight elevator or something.
Right, yeah.
And a service elevator. But
Oh, I love that he said the 3 things. Storage was one of them.
Yeah.
Because I heard in a couple of buildings
Yeah.
we went to, that storage was, we don't need as much storage, so they could save money.
The facilities at Springfield College that I was involved building with our athletic facilities, storage was huge. Obviously, parking was because of events, but the storage and bathrooms, people don't really want to think about. And he was absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
That's where we had to
Parking,
expand some of ours.
storage, and what was the third one?
Bathrooms.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from visiting, just a whole variety of buildings, including museums and libraries lately and so on. If you go in the bathroom and you feel like, oh, this is a nice bathroom, I would use this bathroom every day, multiple times a day. It gives you a whole different feeling about the building, especially if you're somebody who, like a lot of our people need to use the bathroom a lot. And right now we have bathrooms that people want to spend as little time in as possible, right? But there's just something, if your community respects you enough and provides you with a dignified space to eat in and to go to the bathroom and safety about parking your car or whatever it is, like that goes a long way. Now, some people in the community want to see more buildings built that have hardly any parking because they want to force people to use public transportation or ride their bike or walk to get there. And that's a different ethos, but also it doesn't really apply in New England, our kind of community, to older people, but that might turn some people on about another kind of building, and that's fine, so that's why we have to think about our audience.
So it's time to go into the executive session. I'm trying to find the executive session. Thank you.
So the form, Leslie, do you happen to have the form on your computer that we used last time, the executive session form?
Well,
If
I've
not,
done
I
it so
can get
much,
it
I
out.
should be able to
Yeah.
just
But-
state it.
should happen.
Purpose of going into executive session is to talk about real value of property.
Should be on the agenda, the quote from the statute.
To consider purchase, exchange, and lease or value of real estate.
You didn't vote to that effect.
So we would vote, so the motion I'll make the motion to go into executive session under MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate. And that an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. Another part of the motion is we will not record this session. only 10 minutes.
Will not go back into open session.
And we will not go back into open session. Right. So that's the motion on the floor.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
So
Aye.
please stop recording.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.